there's records that have a ton of that, and we keep them in there because cleaning up them sometimes doesn't sound better.
Yeah, sometimes you could ruin the vibe if you overdo it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's the sound because that's how they tracked it, and if you don't clean it in the track of the recording, the actual guitar track or vocal track, then because it's steady, like like that, it will sound phasey or woolly or whatever. Better done on the tracks.
Totally. What are your thoughts on loudness? The loudness wars. Platform streaming, normalizing. How loud are you delivering, and do you care? Like, what are your thoughts there?
I think you've probably heard this from a lot of other mastering engineers. If we didn't have to fight the level, we would probably get better sounding records. That being said, sometimes records have a sound by them being crunchy or loud or compressed. Sometimes that's the vibe because they're looking for a vibe that they heard before in other records. There's a difference between the loudness as loud or loud as compressed loud, or they're all different because each one represents a different energy and vibe. There's records that were done back in the day and they're very loud just by the way they are, not because they were pushed loud. Just they have an arrangement and a production that lets them open up big time. I can give an example, a record that's loud, I think, for the time that it came out, but it sounds amazing, is Joe Satriani, The Extremist. You press play on that record, it's loud, and it's a record from the 90s. Beginning of the 90s, but it still sounds loud, okay? In a good way. And it really sounds good. I like it. But again, if a record can sound better not as loud, maybe it's better to go that route. But if the loudness is an aesthetic, that's where you're heading because that loudness makes this crunchiness and compression and limiting work with the music, with the type of energy and vibe and aesthetic and whatever you want to call it, so be it. It just, if you're trying to compete with level, be aware that there's a point where it just diminishing returns.
For sure.
And when people say, I don't want the loudest record on the planet, but can you make it louder? Basically, you're asking for the loudest. It's like, depends how far you want the record to be loud. If like, can you make it louder? Can you make it louder? Yeah, well, sometimes you can. And sometimes you can make it louder, but it doesn't sound that great. And it's not related to the type of mix in terms of quality. It's related to the type of mix in terms of if that mix sounds good louder or not. There's mixes that are sounding amazing, but once you start pushing them, they lose their vibe. Okay, and some mixes are not amazing, but you can push them and they sound good pushed. They have a vibe. And sometimes you get mixes that sound amazing both, with level and without level. But there's always a compromise. You're always going to gain something and lose something. Not all limiters are limiters. Some of them are clippers or multi-band compressors or multi-band limiters. And when you'll put them in, they change the sound now. And you're like, okay, I like the change. Yeah. Some of them are like, I don't know what it does, but I don't dig it. So, my conclusion is there's records I've done a decade ago that I'm still happy with, and they were not loud. And there's records I've done 5 years ago. They're not loud, and I still like them. And there's records I've done 5 or 6 years ago that were loud that I'm not happy with them. And some of them that I am happy with them. I guess it always depends on, maybe that compression is over, too much, clipping, whatever. But it worked with the song. But maybe if I've done it less, it will be better. But the client wanted it differently. And at the end of the day...
The client always wins, right? The client's always right and they always win.
I don't think the client is always right. I think the client is the person you're catering. And either they're going to listen to your suggestion and go with it, or they're going to listen to their ideas and go with it. And you either are the person who gives them what they want, or you don't, or you give them what they want and they're flexible to work with what you suggest, or they'll be not as flexible and they would be very stubborn about certain things, or whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, I don't use the term the client is always right, because right means that someone else is wrong, or almost right, or right as well, but not the right. You know what I'm saying? I just think it's a it's a service industry, and if you make food that it's very tasteful, but the person eating it wants to put a lot of ketchup on it because he likes ketchup, then he got what you gave him and he ate it with ketchup, and that's the way he wanted it to be served.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
You can recommend. You can say, "Hey, it won't do good with the ketchup. Why don't you put mayo on it?" Oh, okay. And they tried and they dig it, or they're like, "No, we'll put ketchup."
I'm a ketchup guy. You know, what are you gonna do
How
about
about ketchup and mayo together? It's fine.
Love it. It's a great analogy. I'm gonna use that.
There are times where you need to tell the client, "I don't think this is good for the song," and at least he heard your opinion. And if he agrees with that, great. If he doesn't agree with that, then you do what he wants, But I think it's, some people prefer not to talk because they don't want to get in an argument, or they don't want people to remember them for saying their opinion. And that's valid. If that's the way they work and it works with their clients, they probably should stay with the way they work because it's their winning formula. For me, it's important to be communicative on those levels. And if I feel what they're doing is less good, I'll tell them. But I'll tell them that they can, they can make a decision and whether they agree with me or not, and I'll just do what they want,
Yeah.
But I do have to tell them, where I think it's.
Well, you're Israeli, so you got to give them some of that chutzpah,
Well, yeah. Well, as Israelis, we're very direct or blunt, or we just want to put it out there what it is. It is what it is, and we can deal with you not agreeing with us. We're used to that.
Totally. It's the culture, man. For sure. So I wanted to, ask you kind of more general questions. You're doing this pretty much every day, I'm assuming. Do you have any routines or habits to kind of keep you staying fresh, creative, not burning out? How do you stay, jazzed to get in the studio every day?
First of all, you really need to love what you're doing. Okay. Once you get tired from it, you don't leave. But if you get tired from it, then it means you need a break or something, or it means that you're working on stuff that's not interesting for you, and you need to find something that's interesting for you. Even if it's a project that's not money driven, like there's no, like, let's say there's a project that's just interesting for you on a level of working in a challenge that is, you get vibe from the music. That can interest you and bring you back to that place where you got tired and now you're excited again. There's a lot of practice in this, and even if you do it day in, day out, you can get tired from certain things and you'd be like, it's repetitive or not. So one of the things is playing around with different gear. You're trying different gear. Different gear gives you new ideas or new sounds. Sometimes, working on a project, even if it's not a big name or something, but there's something cool to it. It's refreshing, and always remember why you came to this. You have to remember, and believe me, it could be very tiring, chasing clients, dealing with, putting out fires, dealing with administrations and all that. But that's why it's good to talk with peers. I'm a true believer that, as a community, there's place for us to talk, not just to be like, oh yeah, he's known, this guy's known, I know of this guy, but more be like, yeah, you can vent, you can ask opinion, someone's opinion, you can ask for advice. That helps a lot because it tells you you're not you're not alone in this. You're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah, for me, just doing this podcast has been so amazing to meet so many people and get to schmooze with them, and that's really opened my eyes. And honestly, the first time I went to AES, the only time I went to AES, and I think it was 2017 or 2018. It was 2017. I went to AES and I was like, oh, there are other people that do this. I'm not just like alone in my little man cave hiding away working on music. I could actually talk to other people that are doing what I do. It really opened my mind, and it was like, wow, talking with other people that do this is good, and it makes me feel like a part of a community, and it makes me feel like, I'm not alone, and my questions are valid, and my imposter syndrome is, I have other people to vent about it and feel, heard or whatever. It's like super important.
Back in the day when the studio industry was big, people would meet each other in the hallways, between Studio A, Studio B, Studio C, and then some of the engineers would record in one studio and mix in a different one, or do overdubs in a different one. So you were always surrounded by other musicians and engineers, assistants, mixers, studio managers, techs, renting companies, the ones that have rental gear. And so you were always surrounded by people. Even if you were working in late sessions and barely seeing people, there were people there, just because that was part of what that studio had, or the studio near it had. Now we're mostly isolated. It's like pre-COVID, we were isolated. During COVID, we were isolated. And after COVID, we're isolated, unless we bring the clients in.
No difference.
But yeah, unless, of course, we bring the clients in. But the thing is that there's still studios that work and have hallway talks and all that. There's still people recording in one place and mixing in the other, but it's less and less than before in terms of the big places. The smaller places exist, and there's buildings of different small studios in them, and people meet in the hallway sometimes or work together. But we get more isolated because our eyes are on the screen more. Okay, so we're sitting and editing and doing this and this and this, and we're on one computer, the same computer. We could be editing and recording and mixing and writing emails and looking on social media and watching a movie, and we're in the same place. Okay, so that is isolating us as well. And going out to events, I think, is good. I haven't been in the last 2 AESs, but before that I was going to at least probably 8 or 10. I don't remember, but I was going to a lot of them, and it was fun. You're seeing people and talking and seeing gear, and I like talking shop, talking gear, music.
Sure.
It's important because, if you're not talking about it at all, then you might feel alone, I think.
Yeah. No, it gives you clues of what to do next, and what you're thinking about. Is it valid? Is it not valid? It's super important to kind of have those basic conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dialogue is important. You can do online and forums, but it's like you send a message and you're waiting till somebody responds. It's not always immediate.
No, it's not the same thing. And also, it doesn't have the social element either. You know what I mean? You could be talking about gear on a forum and get information you want, or you could be talking about gear with a person and then also build a relationship and learn about the gear. It's a completely different space,
yes. And talking in real time is, even if it's a chat, but it's in real time, it's a different response.
Totally. So, in terms of management, I know some people have management, some people don't have management. Is that something that you do? Does somebody help you with your clients? And
I personally talk to my clients. I don't have management.
Nice. How do you stay on top of all of the work coming in? Because I know mastering engineers have a ton of work and it's all over the place. How do you stay organized?
I have to work all day to finish everything. I have to be there. I take breaks, and then I do this, and I make a phone call here, make a phone call there, come back to work, and then do the email here and the email there. And yeah, it's chaotic, but but we manage to do it. Certain things you could do at a certain time, certain things you have to wait till later on. It's like it's a football game. A lot of people are at the same time moving from one place to another.
Yeah.
Basically, you're doing all that stuff. It's complicated, and some stuff, it's easier to do in the night when there's no distractions. Some stuff you got to do in the morning immediately to catch the people. I do a lot of international work, so that way I have to make some phone calls in the night too. So
yeah, it's rough, right? We're working around the clock these days.
Exactly, because we're in one big general time zone that can change 10 hours here, 10 hours there, 3 hours here, 3 hours there, 5 hours there. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd. Any tips for staying, I don't know, on top of it, or